Okay. All right. Hey guys, welcome back to the Chad and Mel Movie Hour. Thank you again for being here and putting in all of the hard work and pressing on through Predator, Predator 2, AVP, and worst of all, AVP Requiem. We salute you. Your hard work is paid off because we are now on to the meat and potatoes. And tonight is Prometheus. Finally, we made it to the serious shit. So we are going to maybe set a little bit of an agenda here. We are going to kind of talk to you a little bit about how we saw the film, what our reactions were, some of the key players, and then we're going to dive right in. So Prometheus came out in 2012?
Yes.
Okay. I saw it in the theater on opening night. I have an Instagram post from that night, and it says, it's a picture of the line, and it says, waiting in line to see the Queen, because I was expecting to see, a Xenomorph. But yeah, I saw it in the theater. I loved it. I still love it. It's not without its problems, but I think it's a fucking great film. Chad, what about you?
I agree. I saw it in theaters in California and in Sherman Oaks, and I have an Instagram post of holding my ticket in front of some with some really cool shoes on. Yeah, it was so special when it came back in the hands of Ridley. It was a cool memory, and yeah, I loved it as well. Don't get me. So yeah, I'm with you.
So let's talk about, why don't you tell everybody what Ridley's hand was, like what his part was in bringing this, and let's also frame that it's not a sequel, it's not a prequel, nobody knows what the fuck we're dealing with.
It's its own hybrid, which is now like allowed, and it's so weird because in film there used to be more hard and fast rules, and now it seems a lot of that is melting away, and people are doing these hybrid things, which no one would have dared attempt. I don't know why, but like people used to be like, it's either a prequel, like it had to fit into a box. Maybe that was like a studio thing, but definitely films are more outside the box. So this is kind of like a linear timeline that runs sort of parallel to Alien in the Alien universe, hitting on some of the same plot points, but it's not a reboot because it's different, and it's not necessarily a prequel because, especially if they make one more film, they're going all the way through. But a prequel would, in my mind, be a little bit more of a straightforward, like a sequel is. It would match the movie more. So it's a bit of a prequel, tiny bit, but it's mostly like its own thing that just shares the Alien DNA.
Right. And so Ridley Scott...
And this was brought back by Ridley Scott, Walter Hill, David Giler, who have been involved in the franchise like the whole way. So that's pretty cool. Not just Ridley, but the other two producers that have been involved along the way too.
Yeah, I think to this day, I think the reason why people like the movie and are willing to see its sequel, Covenant, and the final element of the trilogy, which is, I think, going to be called Alien Awakening, is because Ridley is back behind the wheel, and it's not just some random remake or AVP or whatever. Daddy's back, and everybody's happy about that. But yeah, the fact that it's kind of this parallel narrative that plays with the original but isn't a sequel and it isn't a prequel makes it both frustrating to kind of make sense of what's going on, but it's also really exciting because you get an entirely new mythology to play around with.
Right.
And of course, you have a stellar cast. And I think, what makes this movie, lends this movie a certain amount of credibility is the fact that you have players like Charlize Theron, Michael Fassbender, Noomi Rapace, Idris Elba, Logan something or other. Who else am I forgetting? What's Logan's last name?
Idris Elba, Logan Marshall Green.
Logan Marshall Green, yeah.
Noomi Rapace, Michael Fassbender, Guy Pearce. I'm about 50-50 with this cast. Like, I think it's halfway like perfect casting, and then I think there's some problems like here and there. but which we'll get it more into when
We'll,
we
we'll,
talk
we'll
about
get.
the cast.
I feel a heated debate about Charlize coming down the pipe.
Yes, be prepared. Gird your loins.
Gird your loins, clutch your pearls. So I remember the initial fan reaction, and I can't believe this movie is already 7 years old, almost 8 years old. I felt the reaction, like, it was successful at the box office. I don't think there's any arguing that.
Like 400 million it made.
Yeah, domestically 400. Okay. Yes. I think I remember the fan reaction being very on par to the critical reaction, which usually doesn't happen, especially with a franchise that's as beloved as this. But I remember it kind of being split. Like, you had people that loved it and kind of were seeing it for what it is. It's like this kind of standalone entity. And then you had people who were expecting an Alien sequel or prequel and were left wanting. So you knew, I think, going into Prometheus that there was going to be at least one more movie at the time. So you knew you were getting another kind of franchise, if you will. But I remember it being kind of split. Like, diehard Alien people like yourself were just like having none of it. And then other people were like, oh, this is cool. This is fun. This is an interesting addition to this, like, deeply rich mythology. That's how I remember it.
Right. I am somewhere in the middle. Like, I actually love this film, but I think that they started off to make more straightforward prequel, which I think would have kind of been difficult to match it, to like match the look really well. They're kind of doing it with Star Wars. Like, some of these Star Wars have a retro, realistic feel, which is cool. So I would have been a little happier if it stayed truer and went less off into its own thing. But nonetheless, I appreciate it kind of for what it is, and I just like it. I have way more problems with the sequel, which we won't talk about now. But
subscribe, like, and stay tuned.
Yes. So I like it, and I was really interested to see where he was going to go from there after I saw it. I wasn't like, there's not enough of this or not enough of that, because like you said, I knew there was another film coming. The budget for it was like 120 million, which we were talking about in a previous Chad and Mel movie hour, that like the Predator movies and stuff and the AVPs were like way less budget than that. So this was like a huge movie for the studio and for Ridley, and it made 400 million, I think, worldwide, not domestically, but worldwide.
Oh, okay.
And which is a lot. I mean, that's a good chunk of change for this kind of a sci-fi movie that's not like a Marvel movie or not like one of those type of movies. But yeah, I love this film. I think the more time goes on, the less I love it. I don't know why that is, but but do you want to talk about the cast a little bit, or what do you want to talk about?
I do. I definitely want to talk about the cast, but to your point about how as time goes on and the more you watch it, the less you love it, I totally agree with. But I think that's, for me anyways, it's because it's something that is so that makes itself so accessible and available to pick apart. But and so the more you pick it apart, like, the more flaws you can find. But I also think that's a testament to what a great movie it is that it gives you enough to be pissed off about. I'd rather feel something than nothing, and we've talked about that before in previous movie hours. Is like, I'd rather come out of a movie like pissed or angry than just like, I got exactly what I thought I was gonna get, and just whatever. But yeah, so the cast, I was really like shocked to see Idris Elba when it first came out, and this was kind of pre Idris's like major, like he was famous, but he wasn't like sexiest man alive famous. Like, people weren't thirsty for him back then, I don't think. So I was really happy to see him in the role. I thought he killed it. I love Guy Pearce. I was really, I still to this day have issues with that character, but
The
I
makeup.
do, yeah, the makeup. And we'll talk about effects for sure, but I love Guy Pearce. I don't really think he can do much wrong.
Let's talk about them like one at a time. Like, let's talk
Oh,
about
sorry. Okay.
Idris.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so you give your take, I'll give my take.
I liked Idris's character. I very rarely think he does anything wrong. I think he's taken some shitty movies and scripts in his time, but given what he's given to work with, I think he's always spectacular. And I think him playing, the sophisticated British actor playing this kind of like redneck role, this blue collar, like I think he nailed it. And I loved the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young references and how he had Stephen Stills accordion. Like his portrayal of that character felt authentic to me and harken back to like the original like tropes and characters that you got with the original Alien and that working class feel. I got a sense of authenticity and sincerity from him.
I just feel that he's a good actor, but that I always feel like when I watch it that I want more of his character. Like I wanted more, like better scenes for him to like kind of do more. Like you only get like little scenes here and there. And I don't know of a way that could really be fixed because everyone can't be the star. But at the same time, it's just like he's interesting, but you just don't see a lot of him or enough of him. And he just seems like he's always like kicking back on the ship. It's just kind of like, okay. So he's not my favorite in this, but
I agree with that, but I think that holds true with the exception of Michael Fassbender's David and Noomi Rapace's character. Like I think for me that holds true for all of the supporting cast in this movie is like I wish I had more time to get to know them and like there was more screen time. Say again?
Well, there's a couple that I'm glad we don't have.
Well, okay, yes, but like I feel the way I feel about Idris's character and him as an actor, I feel about Charlize. I know we don't always agree on this, but I feel like we should have she should have been given more. Her character should have been more fleshed out, and she should have been given more to play with and more screen time, so we could have seen Vickers as a character like really materialize. But with all of that, I think one of the things that just came to mind as you were speaking is that it would have been, and I know they have to kill characters off, somebody's got to get got, but it would have been really fun to see the same band of characters in Covenant and in Awakening, like at least see some of them roll over. To have like this entirely new set of people that are
but
equally
you like
underdeveloped.
Charlize in this one?
Say again?
But you love Charlize in this one.
I do. I really do. I don't think she's as fleshed out as she could be, but I think given the amount of time that she has and the amount of character development she's given, I think she does a good job as like the Stone Cold, the Ice Bitch, the Ice Queen. But why don't you tell our huge audience why you disagree?
I do disagree a little bit. I 100% agree that she should have been fleshed out more. I think that her character is kind of one-dimensional because she is the Ice Princess, the Ice Bitch Queen, but she never has a moment where she slips out of it enough to like really reveal her humanity. There should be more layers to her, and that goes back to what you just said, that there should have been a little more care to her writing, because if not, you can have a great actress like Charlize give, unfortunately, kind of a two-dimensional role of someone who's always on bitch mode, or always, you know what I mean? And even if someone presents bitch mode or bitch face like to the world, there's always a private moment, right, where you would think where there's different layers to everybody. So no one is usually just cardboard. So I think we kind of almost see like glimmers of it, but I don't think we ever really see enough of her character doing anything other than that Stone Cold, which I don't think she's like honestly the best at as an actress. Of course, I love her, but as a bitch, I don't know. It's just her whole thing is strange to me.
I'll cede that. I'll cede that to you. I'll give that to you.
And then the moment where she's with Guy Pearce and she's like, Father. That's not her fault. That's the writing, but it's like so heavy-handed, and it's just like, oh, come on.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. That is a disappointment. But I think the only time you get to see her break is like when she decides like she's gonna fuck Idris Elba's character, and I can't remember his character's name, but like it's the only time you see her drop the facade. It would be nice to have seen more of that, especially given the fact that we discovered that she is Guy Pearce's daughter. She is the heir to the Wayland throne, and you would think the heiress to the Wayland throne would be given a more fleshed out storyline. Where is Ripley? Ridley. I did what you did. Remember when the audience hasn't seen that footage yet, but I
never did that because we edited it out. I never.
But yeah, I think a character as critical to like the potential narrative, a potentially critical character to this narrative, being the heir to the throne, should have had a better storyline.
That's such a great point, and I never quite thought about it that way, but it's such a great point because she's almost like she almost should be like a new icon of this mythology because she is family. I mean, she is Wayland family. So, like, that's a huge deal. And they did not make a big enough deal about that. Yeah.
I agree.
She should be, like, one of the new icons. Like, oh, this is one of the Waylands or whatever.
Right. And you would think, because this was pre-Me Too, this was pre-Time's Up, this was pre the era we're living in 2019 with, you know, hashtag feminism and all that. She could have been like a really badass feminist or just woman character icon for the screen and for this story without all of the politics of today, and it was just like a wasted opportunity. Like she was just a throwaway character.
I agree. Well, but what about Noomi Rapace?
Okay,
because I love her.
We all do. Okay, I just want to say, like, as we're filming this, she's now in Jack Ryan season 2, which breaks my heart because what is she doing? She deserves better. I know she can get better, like, scripts, not like get better talent-wise. Like, what the fuck is she doing on Jack Ryan season 2? I digress. Seriously. I thought she was
from Prometheus to Jack Ryan.
I think she was brilliant on Shaw. And I mean, she's just, she brought such warmth. And we've talked about, to a certain extent, and we'll get more into this as we get into the original franchise, but we've talked about with AVP, with Sanaa Lathan's character, and these Ridley, like reiterations of Ridley, of Sigourney Weaver. And so you get that with this movie for sure, and you get it with Covenant. But I think Noomi Rapace as Shaw brings such like warmth and like vulnerability that it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel to me like an impersonation. She does feel like something new.
I totally agree. She brings kind of like a freshness and a totally like new generational vibe. She brings herself. She brings a lot of intelligence to the role. She's really great in the role. I think the med pod scene where she uses the med pod and that whole sequence to get the thing out of her is one of the, like, potentially one of the more iconic moments in the whole franchise. It really stands up there. It's like a newer version of the chestburster scene. So, and she was incredible in that. And I can't say enough great things about her. It's funny because if you see the making of it, Ridley's a little creepy with her during the costume fittings. If anyone has seen that, if anyone has not seen Furious Gods, the making of Prometheus, it is one of my if not my very favorite making of all time because of how well it's done.
It's so detailed.
How fascinating
3 hours.
Exactly, and how fascinating this whole process was of putting this film together, what it could have been, what it started at. They're so honest about how it morphs and how the conscious choices they make it more about the bigger questions of who are we and where do we come from and all those things, and to get away from Alien a little bit, for better or worse. For worse, no. But yeah, so that's
speak the truth. Speak the truth.
That's a fantastic making of, doc, and I think it's as good as the film, the actual making of, because it's one of those moments like Jodorowsky's Dune, where something could have been made that it was so epic that kind of didn't get made, and there's all this fantastic like concept art and all these aliens and all this like amazing stuff that never made it into the final film, but you see it all in that making of, and it's pretty incredible. But anyway, there's a moment in that documentary where Noomi Rapace is having costume fittings and Ridley Scott is on set with her, and it's a little creepy. He's like, nice butt and stuff to her, and it's just like, it reminds me of like probably when Donald Trump went behind the scenes of like Miss America, because he was, but I won't hold it against Ridley. It's not all the way there. It's not too bad. We can't pass judgment. But it's just funny. You could tell, it's kind of charming actually, because you could tell that he really liked Noomi and kind of had a crush on her maybe. But you could tell he really dug her. But yeah, it's interesting to see these days. But like you said, this movie was before that movement, and I think he was just speaking freely. But I do think he's probably a great guy, so we won't say he did anything wrong.
We will not, and I think it's important, and I think this comes up in a lot of our movie hours, and it will continue to. It's like this concept of being able to take off our 2019 glasses and like just calm the fuck down and have some perspective, but also like, in doing that, especially when you need to do that as a necessity, in my opinion, when you're observing art. When you're watching behind the scenes footage and you're actually seeing something that happened, that stuff can take you aback because it makes you like second guess the integrity of somebody that you otherwise respect. But also, then you have to take a further step back and realize like you weren't physically there, you don't know what the context was,
right?
And so like, just also calm the fuck down,
Seriously. Hashtag calm the fuck down.
Yeah, because we live in a world now, and we will live in a world, I think, forever, where, people are going to do things that are maybe unsavory, but that people don't necessarily feel threatened or scared of or are offended by. But like, as an outsider, if you were to see it, you'd be like, oh my God, like, how can you, like, what #MeToo? It's like, well, comes out you weren't there, like, maybe it wasn't that.
It would be up to Noomi to hashtag that moment, not anyone else. Yeah.
Correct.
And she's not doing that. So.
Yeah. So like, I'm just gonna toast like maybe like PC police needs to calm down in general. But I do want to say that I do have you to thank for introducing me to Furious Gods, the documentary, and I highly recommend everyone watch it, especially if you're a behind the scenes fan and a making of fan. It's amazing. But,
and I think it answers a bunch of questions for fans, because a lot of fans found this movie confusing and had a lot of questions. So much so that on the cover of the Blu-ray when it came out, it literally has a sticker on the Blu-ray cover that says, "Questions will be answered."
Oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah, it's hilarious. I don't have it with me right this second, but I do own it. But yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, well, I think the Noomi Rapace costume fitting that's shown in Furious Gods is a good segue into Michael Fassbender and his character David, because one of the things that struck me in Furious Gods is the creative process around designing his look. And one of the choices they made that you learn in watching Furious Gods is that they initially wanted him to be barefoot, and then they felt like that really didn't like make sense, but they didn't want to like make him look exactly like everybody else, so they made the ultimate choice to make him wear flip-flops throughout at least the opening sequences of the film. When he's just on his own and moving about the ship, he's in flip-flops. Mm-hmm. And when you rewatch the movie and like know how they came to that decision, it's so rich to me, because seeing this synthetic human in flip-flops is like A, endearing, B, it humanizes him, and C, it's just like what a simple but like profound costuming choice, you know? Right. Like
and it works. It just works.
It works, yeah. So do you want to talk about Michael Fassbender? Because sure. I will talk about Michael Fassbender.
Well, I love him. When this film came out, I was like all about him. I was like, he's the best thing in the movie. So when I first saw Prometheus,
yeah,
I just thought he was like the greatest thing to happen to this film. This whole franchise gets so lucky with all of the android actors. Don't you agree?
I agree. Like, I concur.
The first
Lance
film,
Henriksen.
The first film, Ian Holm is amazing as Ash. Yes. Bishop, of course. Lance Henriksen. I mean, every time this series puts forth, well, Call was okay. Call and Resurrection.
We'll get to Call in due time.
I know. I love me some Winona.
But yeah.
Sit down, girl. With the exception of her, maybe every single one of them, the men at least were good.
And how often can you say that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just making a joke on our Me Too thing. But honestly, though, that's one of the more interesting. Even though these are like alien movies, that's become like a real life force within this franchise. Is the telling of the story of androids, and of course from this director Ridley Scott, who of course did Blade Runner, which we love, which is all about replicants, and they're called in that film. But so I think he really is like on par with the first two film androids. I mean, if not maybe better in some ways. He's such an incredibly gifted actor. He like breathes so much life into the reality that this is an android, that it's not human.
Right.
So it's just like incredible, and he deserves a lot of accolades for his work in this film, I think.
Yeah, sorry, my hair is falling flat. What else is new? I agree. I don't really think there's any arguing that Fassbender is just an extraordinary talent and an extraordinary physical specimen. And I'm not saying that just to objectify him. I'm definitely here to objectify him. But because of Fassbender's
we can a little bit
beautiful German bone structure, like he just fits. Like he's a pretty man, and I love pretty men, and his face is just so well suited for like a synthetic human. It's just right. I can't. And with the makeup and then the hair, and so we got to talk about the hair and the inspiration of Lawrence in Arabia, and how we're gonna get into all of that. But
right.
You just said something that you didn't even mean to say, but it's so poignant that the synthetic humans in this franchise are such life forces, and I think that like bears calling attention to, because they're not living in the sense that we are, even though they're sentient, but they are this somehow. Ash and Bishop and now David are very much, especially in the new Prometheus Covenant Awakenings situation, are literally like the life force of the film. Like they're right. The catalyst that kind of moves things forward, and also call you to question like what life can be and how life can manifest. Right. Because in the films, these people are, able to accept that there's alien life forms. Well, so then why isn't David or Ash or Bishop equally respected? And that's one of the plot points of Prometheus, which I think is so brilliant, is this discussion, especially between Logan Marshall Green's character and David, like their dynamic of like what happens when you treat AI like shit and when you don't respect AI as
Right.
being fully realized and sentient, which we can get into. But yeah, I think Fassbender is definitely being called on to carry this franchise for better or worse. But I think he's, for me, one of the reasons why I am invested is because his acting is so great.
Right. Yep, I agree. And it's interesting that they're meant to be like the B story. You know how you have your A story, your B story. So they're not even meant to be the main dish, but they always kind of steal the show. Like
Yeah.
Bishop totally stole the show. The android in the original, of course, came out of nowhere, so that stole the show. And David definitely steals the show here. So, possibly too much, you know. I mean, for me, he is the show in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, his acting is so like nuanced, and I think that's what makes it great. Like you can watch that performance over and over again and recognize different choices that he's made for that character every time. You're seeing something new, and not a moment betrays him supposing to be David, you know?
Amen. Hallelujah. So should we dive into David a little bit more, or should we start with the opening scene of the film and like how this differs from a traditional alien narrative?
Let's go through some of your notes that you have and just go through the film.
Well, the opening sequence starts and really takes the audience by surprise. I mean, it took me by surprise. I think it takes everybody's by surprise. And that you're introduced to a new race of creatures, which you ultimately come to know are the engineers. So in this opening sequence, you have this very Greco-Roman alien, a male-appearing person standing on the edge of a cliff on an alien landscape. Oh my god, and the cinematography in this movie and wherever the hell they filmed it, it's just all the right choices. Yeah. But this like grayscale color, but you have this gentle person, taking this, what looks like fucking boba fucking balls, I don't know, out of a ceramic thing and drinking them, and then all of a sudden he dies, and he like vaporizes, and then his like little particles fall into the water and then disintegrate, but not really, and then they form like this new DNA strand, and then cut to credits, opening credits, and then we're like, what's going on? So right. I thought that was a very amazing choice in terms of like letting the audience know this is not your mom's Alien franchise, like you're getting a new story. And then it kind of just cuts to what we are accustomed to, which is like that long, slow pan of a spaceship, and you know, you get the credentials of the spaceship, and then it cuts to David alone on a ship playing basketball, riding a bicycle, doing systems checks, and watching Lawrence of Arabia, which we need to talk about. So yeah, I just think that the whole opening sequence with David and getting to know like him before we get introduced, before any of the humans come out of cryosleep, is also a great choice. But I want to pause and like stop for a second.
I love that too. I'm not so sure about the very opening with the, you know, I have issues with these engineers, as they're called.
Yes.
Originally, I mean, people have been waiting since 1979 to meet another race of alien called the space jockey that was only hinted at. But when Giger drew him and designed him, Giger, you know, he was a creature. He was not humanoid. And I think a lot of people were, I don't know that it needed to be that, but like personally, I and a lot of fans would have loved it to stay true to the original Alien film. It's difficult when you're so obsessed with a film like I am with Alien to then grant this film so much leeway. And I did at the time. I just liked it for what it was when it came out. But it's hard not to think of what could have been. And it's amazing to think of Giger's original drawings, where he was like meshed in to the cockpit, like physically growing into it, and that the ship was like all organic, and all that kind of went away with Prometheus, and he became just basically our maker, which is interesting, but I don't know. It's a whole other thing. You have to kind of separate it. That's why I don't like to call it really a prequel, even though it has some prequel tendencies, because it's playing off that story a little bit. But it's totally its own thing. Would have been so amazing after Alien if they just made a sequel in like the early '80s before Aliens that kind of went into that backstory. That's really the only way they could have done it with the same feel and the same technology in that analog way and had it still be so cool. But so I just have to say that just to get off my chest. And I know that's like a fan rant, but be that as it may, it is what it is. And that is how I feel. I think a lot of fans of Giger feel that way because what he made was so like biomechanical and interesting. And it was so otherworldly. And then to just say, oh, well, it's these guys that kind of look like us, but they kind of look like Greek gods. And they came to our planet a long time ago. To me, it feels a little bit like taking the easy way out. Just a little bit. It's still made for a hell of a movie. And like you said, this movie, Prometheus, is a great movie and the cinematography is incredible. But personally, it just seems like a letdown a little bit to a lot of people because of we've thought about it for so many decades.
Right.
We've thought about it since the 70s, and we've always had this in mind. So for it to take so long to come to fruition, and then for it to not be what we're thinking and just be like this totally modern, updated, different take on it that's more like whimsical and like spiritual is just, I think, frustrating for some people. Now, I didn't have a lot of these thoughts when I first saw the film in theaters. I just kind of enjoyed it for what it was, surprisingly. But then as I ruminated on it and lived with it for a while, I started to think more and more about these thoughts that I'm sharing and feel more passionately about them. Because, I mean, if you look at that original Giger artwork of the space jockey, which is now called the engineer, but at the time was called the space jockey, his work from 1978 for that original film, the 1979 film Alien, you can see that it's like a creature and that it even has a helmet over the creature aspects of it. Well, they ignored that he had that helmet over, and they said, no, the creature-looking aspects are a helmet, right? And that can remove to reveal a humanoid. So, and they're so much bigger in that original film if you look at the size. So they really shrunk them down. They shrunk them down. And then if you watch Furious Gods, they talk about how it was way more like Alien when they started, and there were way more aliens. And then John Spate, who was originally writing it, said that they were really close to filming, and then all of a sudden they brought another writer in, Damon Lindelof, who wrote Lost, which you're obsessed with and love. So I won't say anything bad about him, but I think at that time the studio was telling all of them, let's pull back on the alien stuff and really push the engineer stuff, which they say in Furious Gods. But why would a studio say that? That makes no sense. It's like, makes no sense to me. Maybe they thought this is what's right for this story, but that sounds more like a creative choice, and studios just shouldn't be involved like that, I think, but they are.
Right.
But anyway, that's kind of a long rant.
No, it was a beautiful rant, and it was an important one, but do you think that as much as the studio was involved, and this speaks to like problems that we're seeing in films now in 2019, especially with like Star Wars, with focus grouping and all this fucking bullshit, but do you think even though, or rather in spite of the studio being like pressuring, Ridley is not the same age as he was when he made Alien, and we will talk about this in coming videos, but we've talked about this a little bit on and offline and other ones that, you know, and you were the one that shared this with me, is that for Ridley, Alien was not this big, profound project at the
Right.
time for him. It was a job and a movie, and it was wonderful, but
Yes.
everything that came with it was not something that was present at the time of filming.
Right.
So you have that, and then you also have, you know, decades of fandom, and then you
Right.
then have this director and filmmaker and creative person who is at a completely different place in his life, mentally, literally, whatever, that's asking different questions. And that's
Right.
why clearly it's more metaphysical and philosophical. But my question is, do you think that the studio was listening to Ridley pushing back and saying, no, I don't want it to be about aliens and xenomorphs, I want it to be about these questions, and the studio actually gave into Ridley's vision? Or do you think the studio was like, we
They
don't
say
want
it's
aliens?
the studio in the thing, but I think Ridley kind of did some groundwork of getting them on board, like, hey, I think it should be a little bit more about these bigger questions, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it was a little bit of both, maybe.
Because to your point, it would make sense for the studio to want more aliens.
Right. That's what I would think. But they make it sound like the studio wasn't satisfied because John Spates was like a first-time writer, and this was his first big film. And then they were like all set to go into production, and they're like, okay, but pump the brakes. We want to bring in another writer now. And
yeah,
I think they just developed it to death is what I think kind of happened. And I think it suffers because of that. It may be a more interesting film to Ridley, but that doesn't mean it's what was the best for this franchise or for the fans. Not that it always has to be about that. I mean, he certainly has the right to make like whatever kind of film he wants. And I do like this film for what it is, but if I don't think of it in the Alien way, if I just think of it as its own film, then I like it a lot more.
Yeah.
But the more I think about it connected to Alien, the more kind of like confusing it is in a way. But I think the studio did develop it too much, and I think they knew they had a lot on the line, but I think it was overdeveloped a little bit.
I think you're spot on, and I think especially if you take the time to watch Furious Gods, you can really see what went on with the writing process. And yes, Mama does love everything Damon Lindelof touches, but even he was, you know, much like what's going on now with him in Watchmen, like he's being brought in to do a job where he's being asked to be both creatively innovative around stuff that is familiar and engraved in popular culture, you know, whether it's Ridley's narrative or now it's Frank Miller's narrative. And so he's being asked to be a steward, but he's also like, he's beholden to a studio, and he's also trying to honor the people that he admires, like Ridley and Frank Miller. So how do you balance all of that?
There's some telling moments in the Furious Gods documentary. Like there's a moment where one of the creators, I don't know his name, but he's not one of the bigger. He's just one of the other. There were so many different creators and artists on this film, but he is like, you know, he was recounting about how when he was first like, oh, you know, the engineer is something different. It's more like human, and he made us, and we're gonna change this and that. How they like all like collectively lost their shit, and we're like, how can you do this to the alien? Like this is like the holy grail. This is untouchable. But Ridley Scott was way more flippant about it and was way less precious about it, and was way more like, well, I find this interesting now.
Yeah.
So, and I think that he definitely doesn't have the same like reverence for that original film, that moment in the original film that a lot of the fans have. But it definitely shows you that along the way they were having similar reactions to the choices that were being made during production that ultimately the fans had upon its release.
Right.
You know, and then there's things about, I really don't want to talk about Covenant too much, but there's things about that film that confirm that, you know,
Yeah.
because they really pushed the alien a lot more in that film.
Right.
But I think if people had patience, and they talk about, you know, mining social media for opinions and stuff, that's a tricky area too. Just like you said with the focus groups, that's a real tricky area. When you start letting fans call the shots, depends on who you're asking, and there's so many opinions out there, and to just
not everybody's as smart as you or I.
Well, Ridley is this great artist, and he's crafting something, right? And he puts the first part of it out, and you don't know what that second part is going to be, but he's already on a path to make that second part. Well, to stop him immediately and say, oh, now we need to switch gears for your second part, it's not going to be what you originally envisioned. It's going to be, then it fucks everything up. It like throws everything into chaos. So yeah, it's strange, but I think if he would have been left alone a little bit more, to instead of worrying so much about what the fans thought, in a way, then Prometheus could have been even better in its sequel as its own thing, because it was clear it was never going to be about that original space jockey, and it was never going to feel like Alien. They weren't going to do like a retro feel. But it's interesting in the Star Wars films, all the analog equipment they have and the retro moments they have. I wonder why they couldn't have just done something like that with Alien.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Not what he wanted to do, and it's not for us to say that he should or shouldn't have done it, but I definitely have been waiting my whole life to see like a proper Alien prequel. And now we're never going to get it.
We're never going to get it, never going to get it. Cute and Vogue. Yeah, but yeah, okay. So many things that I have to say, but I'm going to like narrow them down to two.
Okay.
So if I can remember them. So, yes, it would be so interesting to see, and please remind me of the gentleman's name that was, if you know it, that was writing the script before they brought in Lindelof for Prometheus. Like, there was that. Okay. Would just like you want to see a sequel to Alien, I would just, especially after watching Furious Gods, I would pay money to see his script realized before the studio pressure and before Lindelof came in, like what this would have been.
Did you see that art that they show in the documentary that shows like a different version of the Alien, but it's way more like the original Giger type of style? Yeah. And they some of the artists were like all in with the Giger style, and then remember they were kind of told not so much with the Giger, calm it down.
Yeah, which I
take several seats with the Giger.
Yeah, and that's another thing. This is an aside, but as beautiful aesthetically as Prometheus is, I think its beauty for me is really in the like landscape. But what am I looking at?
That's an alien.
I see a face hugger, but like who designed that?
Well, this was a theatrical pin for Alien Covenant, which
okay.
I thought it was for Prometheus at first, but it was for Covenant.
Get your shit together before you start.
I know.
But I think the beautiful parts of Prometheus are the landscape and the settings, but like it has its own problems with overuse of CGI, and when you do see the alien in Prometheus burst through the person's chest, it's way too clean. Just kidding. But even still, when you see the alien at the end of Prometheus on the ship, it's still like too CG. Like it's whatever.
You mean the Deacon?
The Deacon.
Because that was
when it's coming out of the engineer.
Right. They had a puppet like on rods.
Oh yeah, sorry. I said ship again. That's Covenant. Yeah.
But no, to your point, there were some CG, like the drool on it and stuff, I think was CG.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell.
I think I don't know. I assume Ridley wanted a different aesthetic with this film to go with like the new narrative and the other questions that are being asked. But I think it's a mistake to erase Giger's aesthetic from this. And the only time you see it at all is when we see the engineer, but then they change, like you've been talking about, like they completely changed what the engineer was. And I want to say one thing about that was my second point, is that and the entirety of the internet agrees, because you can go down subreddit, YouTube rabbit holes, that if they were going to introduce the engineers, like these Greco-Roman entities, that's all well and good. They could be our makers, but that should not have supplanted the space jockey. The space jockey should have been left alone as its own race, its own species, whatever. Because in the original, yes, you have this thing that's calcified into the ship, or into the cockpit of the ship, and it's got the, trunk of an elephant, and that should have been what the creature was this mysterious thing that had this trunk. And instead they changed it into, oh no, it's really just like a humanoid and that's just its oxygen mask. No, sir. There was room for a both and instead we had to choose.
How do they jump from that creature to, it's our creator running around with alien eggs? Like, it doesn't make sense. It makes more sense that it is some other species messing with aliens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's messy.
It is messy, and I just feel like, if you're going to make a trilogy, and again, I'm not a filmmaker, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there isn't enough room. But I would like to think there's enough room, if you're going to write a trilogy, to have an origin story. Like, they could have talked and asked these big questions about who created us, and have this engineer plot, which I think works. But then left the space jockey alone as maybe this thing that's like,
and
remains a mystery.
Right, and this was our one chance to really get it done right. They had enough money that they could have done it the right way. And really, I think it comes down to really not holding it so precious. He's almost bored of it in a way, like he's ready to do something different. So really, he should have just made a totally different film. This shouldn't have even been an alien film. Right. But this was our one chance to kind of get a prequel, and now, like I said, now we really never will. But that's okay. I'm at peace with it.
It's not like we have a choice.
I know.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could go on. So in the opening scene, we see the engineer drink boba balls, and we don't know what they are, but they're some sort of like, they're like some sort of like self-destruct mechanism. So it begs the question, like, you have this lone engineer left alone on a planet that is clearly committing suicide, right? So what are the seeds? Because we see them later on in the film. We don't see them later on in the film, but we see like the results of the seeds later on in the film, which is essentially the black goo or the green goo. I don't know what color it is. It's like a murky blackish green. So whatever the engineer ate, whatever these boba balls are, his DNA disintegrated in order to seed a new organism.
To seed the planet. Right, to seed the planet with DNA, or at least the beginnings of DNA. They could then grow into, eventually become humans on the planet.
Okay, well, see, that's where I take issue, is because was that their goal?
If he did that and he was disintegrating down to DNA, then wouldn't it develop engineers on the planet, not humans?
Right.
Because it's his DNA. That doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense, but so I think that's what the seeds must be, something that fucks with the DNA to create a new thing, right?
Because why?
Well, okay, but here's the thing though. The new DNA that happens once engineer commits suicide via boba balls doesn't yield humans. It yields
the building blocks of life.
It yields essentially the black goo, right? Because the black goo then kind of almost takes on the form of whatever it interacts with, i.e. that stingray tentacle thing when they're in the ship.
Right.
And then
but doesn't it create like evil stuff and creatures? But the whole point there is they're trying to seed that planet with life. Like
with
humans.
life, but not necessarily humans, right? Like they don't know that they're going to get you or me. They just know they're going to.
We don't even know that that's Earth, actually.
Right. Well, it's not, right? It's like XR something. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But
I think the point of that scene is to show that they are like seeding different planets.
Right. So
that's definitely the point of it. And then I think the extrapolation from that is that they created us, that they seeded Earth in a similar way, and that humans were a result. At least that's what I got. Is that what you got out of it?
No, it was. And what I also got is that humans were an accident as a result of that experiment, just like creating the Deacon was an accident, because they didn't know what was going to happen. They just put that DNA.
But the black goo is different, because there is a black goo that creates more of like xenomorph type creatures, like much more aggressive creatures. And I think it's different than what was in the boba tray.
Okay.
Because the black goo specifically is like a weaponized type of a substance. Like it creates evil, crazy things. But it doesn't create like human-like things.
Well, you could argue that we're evil, but I'm not going to go down that road. But I wanted to say that we need to reference this point when we get to Covenant, because there's a deleted scene in Covenant where David feeds Billy Crudup's character the boba balls, and we get a chest burster.
Well, when you said like we're evil, that reminded me just now of, even in Prometheus, they kind of say that they were like fed up with us because we ended up becoming creatures of war, and
we were a failed experiment. And so when is it what's Wayland's first name? It's not Peter. So this is Peter Wayland, which is the grandfather, or is it the father of who is Bishop playing in Alien vs. Predator?
Charles Wayland.
Okay, so
but I don't think the stories quite work together. The
timelines don't add up. Okay.
Not quite.
But when you see Peter Wayland's character played by Guy Pearce in Prometheus, desperate for immortality because he's earned it, because he's himself seeded new life by creating David and synthetic humans, he feels he's worthy and on the same level as the engineer. So when he finally meets the engineer, once he's woken from whatever sleep he's in, the engineer he's having none of it, just like fucking snaps his neck, right? Like, so it's very, and then Noomi Rapace's character Shaw asks something like, why did you bother with us? And there's really like a non-answer that's given, but the answer that's given based on his behavior of just like killing them is like, you're just like some fucking dust we left on some planet, and we didn't like how that played out.
Which is the ultimate disappointment to someone like Noomi Rapace, who, she had hung so much hope on the idea of them as creators and as wise and as like almost parental. So to have them do that, it's the ultimate dismissal, even more than a parent abandoning you. It's but it's the reality of it, and that part seems really authentic to me.
Agreed. And there's so like I could seriously do like another hour just on like this stuff, but I think one of the brilliant choices that was made in the storytelling of this narrative is that when you get introduced to Shaw's character at the beginning of the film, you get introduced to her via David, because David, before they're woken up from cryo sleep, is basically like watching her memories on some scan or computer. So he's seeing that her father was like an anthropologist / missionary, but he was ultimately a man of faith. He was a Christian. She wears a cross on her neck throughout the film, and her piece of shit boyfriend is questioning it the entire time, and he gets got as he should.
That would be questioning it the entire time.
Yeah, but she's a scientist, but she's ultimately, really, you could argue that she's a woman of faith, because at the end of the day, and we've talked about this offline, is that she's searching for her maker. The whole reason she's using science is to find who made her, which is ultimately a religio spiritual endeavor. And David, as a synthetic being, empathizes, and they have such a rich relationship, which I wish we saw more of, that you have this synthetic being that is empathizing with her.
Right.
Because he understands, having met his maker, how disappointing it is to do so. And you see that when they're all in the room with the space jockey / engineer.
And in a way, there's some validity to what her boyfriend is questioning her religion, because it is all about, you know, her faith and her endeavors are intertwined, and yet it all comes crumbling down on her.
Yeah.
So when it all comes crumbling down on her, it's almost like, see, you know, it all is kind of pointless, but it's very nihilistic.
I was just gonna, it is. I think that's the beauty of Prometheus, without leaning into anything that happens in Covenant, is that, like, you know, they say not to meet your heroes, but the same would hold true, like, don't meet your gods. And one of the things I wish had been fleshed out more with Vickers' character, played by Charlize Theron, is, like, she's the heir to this Weyland-Yutani throne, or at least the Weyland end of it, and her father is this deity in the sense that he created an empire and a race of AI, but he doesn't know how to be a father. He doesn't know how to be a human to her. And the disappointment you see between her and her father, I wish there was more of, but it's still that same theme of, like, don't meet your gods, don't meet your heroes, because ultimately they're going to be disappointed in you, because we're disappointing.
And why does Weyland treat her so dismissively, and like she's such a failure?
Because I don't know, because the movie doesn't give you anything to work with other than that. If you had created something like David, how could anything else live up to it?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, look at Steve Jobs, how how his family dynamics were. If you've ever seen the Fassbender movie with about Steve Jobs, it's kind of similar of a disconnect to certain family members. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. How he did not accept his firstborn biological daughter because he was preoccupied with a machine, which he named after his firstborn biological daughter, but was completely in denial of.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting. I wonder if they were thinking of that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure they were thinking of people like Jobs, and now it would be like Elon Musk, but when they're or Tony Stark, to do a fictional one, but when they're, you know, thinking of this Weyland character, like with the TED Talk bonus feature that they have.
Yeah, I think the TED Talk extra feature is really important to watch, and you can YouTube it just as a thing on its own. But, you know, at the risk of, like, spending too much time on David, I think we should talk about the Lawrence of Arabia references, which are very rich. Do you want to say anything about that before I?
Sure. Just we talked about this offline a little bit about, like, why is he dyeing his hair? Well, it's to look more like the guy in the film, Lawrence of Arabia, and I think it comes from maybe like Weyland loving that film and that being like a piece throughout his, I want to say DNA, but programming, that he like looks up to that and aspires to that, to be like the character in that film for some reason. So he's constantly repeating lines from that film. And it's interesting, his obsession on that film, the way that humans would obsess on a franchise or a character.
Yeah.
But that is very interesting, like when he's dyeing his hair and everything. I love it. It takes me back to when I would sit there in front of the TV with the hair dye. But
I haven't seen Lawrence in Arabia since I was a kid, so
I love that movie.
I have like a nostalgic like remembrance of it, but I need to rewatch it obviously now as an adult. But
yeah.
In
the restoration like on Blu-ray is incredible.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, Peter just to watch like Peter O'Toole speak, just like is amazing. I recently rewatched Troy, and just seeing like Peter O'Toole's just like how it's just like everything he says is like Shakespearean and like delicious. I love it.
Right.
But, I went down some Reddit holes and some YouTube holes and about this, and they really like dissected all of like the nuance of the Lawrence of Arabia references, and one of them is that like Lawrence of Arabia is like this man kind of alone. He's surrounded by people, but he's in the desert, which is a metaphor, but he's ultimately different than the people he's around. So you have this otherness, and that's very similar to what David is experiencing, in that he's in this desert space and he is other than everybody he's around. And in the movie, when you see David like dyeing his hair, he's literally like he's repeating lines from Lawrence of Arabia and mimicking Peter O'Toole's like cadence and accent. And he repeats the quote, what is it? In the desert, there is nothing in the desert,
and no man
needs nothing.
Right.
Like, that's a thesis paper in and of itself.
Right.
Like, what is happening?
It goes to show you kind of how epic and incredible Prometheus is as a film, that so many people can endlessly mythologize. And I mean, like you said, it's like rabbit hole after rabbit hole out there on this film. This film, which is very much of the internet age, of the more modern day age, where you get all the YouTube videos about the meaning or the ending explained or this or that, and all the blog posts and articles that are fan written, and the endless millions of comments on every different page. So there's so much out there, but this film like really lends itself to mythology and speculation and theorizing, and which is awesome. So that's like one great thing about this film.
Can I get really meta to close this out?
Do it up.
Okay. So speaking of Lawrence Arabia, and speaking of David watching Lawrence of Arabia in this movie, when he is fucking with Logan Marshall Green's character, which is Shaw's scientific, materialist, skeptical, kind of douchebaggy love interest, who has zero regard for David as an entity. Like, he respects artificial intelligence zero. Like, he just thinks he's a robot. Only to be bested by said robot. But there's the whole like scene at the table where David drugs him with the black goo. David even says to Logan Marshall Green's character, you're searching for your maker. Imagine how disappointing it would be to. I'm paraphrasing here, but imagine how disappointing it would be to meet them, only to realize that like they're shite,
Yeah.
But I'm prefacing all of that because in that scene, David says to Logan Marshall Green, or he repeats a quote to him from Lawrence of Arabia, which is the trick. I think it's the trick is minding. Not minding that it hurts. Right? Is that right?
Yep. So, well, that's the one he repeats when he's dyeing his hair.
Oh, is that the one he repeats? Okay.
But also when he's looking at the black goo on his finger and he says, "Big things have small beginnings."
Small beginnings.
That's from Lawrence of Arabia. And then the other one is when he says, or the other moment that you're kind of hitting on is when, I think ties into what you're hitting on, is when someone says to David, "They're making you guys pretty close to us humans now," and David shoots back without missing a beat, "Not too close, I hope." Very
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yes. He comes back with the classic burn. Yes.
Burn.
Yeah, and Fire. You're about to literally get got. But what's the meta part of that is like, okay, that's already meta, right? Like you have an artificial intelligence lecturing you on what it's like to meet your maker. But it also, I think that quote, like, the trick is not minding that it hurts, could also apply to like watching this movie, because like it fucking hurts because you're not going to get like answers to questions, and you're not going to get like the sequel or the prequel, or like you're not going to be able to scratch the xenomorphic itch. Like you're not, even when you get Deacon at the end, like you just get like baby Deacon and he's super adorbs and it's like whatever, cool, we got like 2 frames of the alien. But like just that idea of like the movie's just gonna like leave you with more questions, and you just have to like mind that it doesn't, like that it hurts, and like deal with it.
And haven't we talked about this a few times about how we both appreciate films that are a little more open-ended and don't necessarily hold your hand every minute of the way, but allow you to theorize and allow for some interpretation. Certainly, we don't want nothing but questions, but at the same time, it's nice to have a few some mystery.
Yeah. So and I think as frustrating as it is knowing what this could have been and might have been, it's still good, and it still gives you something to chew on.
We can only accept it for what it is.
Yeah, and yeah, it's far from perfect, but it's entertaining as fuck, and you do get a little bit of an alien there at the end, which is delicious. And
I love how that alien looks with the blue skin, and of course we never see it again.
Right, but and we will be talking about that in Covenant.
That's right.
Yes. What happened to Deacon? Stay tuned.
Yes, we did a good job of not slipping into Covenant on this.
I know it was really hard because my notes like completely overlap, but I think I think it's good.
So much of all this is intertwined for sure.
Yeah.
And
I think when we talk about Covenant, there'll be some like referencing to Prometheus.
Sure. Which will be apropos.
I love your use of apropos. So it would be apropos of me at this juncture to ask you if you have any final thoughts about Prometheus.
No, I still do like this film, damn it. But I think I'm glad we had a full discussion about, there's so many sides to it, right? And like you said, we could go on for literally forever. You could go on because he did create such a rich world, at least with the cinematography and all of that. And I just think that most fans across the board, they agreed it was a good movie, but everyone was just like a little bit let down. And it was for different reasons. It was either that it didn't stay true to the original, that was a small sect of the really diehards, but a lot of people felt there wasn't enough alien, which for me, I would have said, well, just, give him time. There was always going to be another film. And then there were aliens, but they were all totally different than the original mythology. But that's because, that's because it's its own thing. It's totally an updated thing. So I think people just weren't quite expecting that. They really wanted, general audiences probably really wanted the alien. So I think everyone was just kind of a little bit let down. Even though it's a stellar film, and even though it's a great film, it does make you think. I still think it, not to repeat myself, but I just think it's maybe a little overdeveloped in some areas, maybe underdeveloped in other areas. But for as far as modern day films go, you don't get much sci-fi these days. So it's pretty cool to have a theatrically released $120 million sci-fi alien movie that goes that far into the sci-fi direction.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and
I like
I
it a lot,
don't think that studio really knew how to like market it well to audiences once it started, like previews started coming out, like, and I think that's why a lot of people didn't know what to expect and were expecting the wrong things. Like they didn't really have a handle on like, what is this a prequel, is this a sequel, like what the fuck are we doing, you know, like nobody gave them the memo. It's
I
neither.
think more so than the marketing, that what you just said is like spot on about how it's confusing that it's not a prequel, it's not a sequel, it shares the same universe kind of, but it's kind of like its own totally new thing. That's kind of a lot to wrap your head around. You know what I mean? I don't know.
The reimaginings, as it were.
Yeah. So I'm pretty open-minded to that, but I just think a lot of people didn't get what they wanted.
Yeah.
But I still like it. I still give it thumbs up. I think everyone should watch the making of with it. That should be like.
Yeah.
But
Rolling Furious Gods in the description. It's a must watch.
There we go.
Yeah.
And so what's next? Next we'll be talking Covenant, where we can get into more of these themes, and we'll expand and talk even more about all this stuff. But Covenant should be an interesting one.
Yeah, because that's where shit gets really messy.
Yeah.
To me, Covenant is like the equivalent of like Rian Johnson coming into Star Wars Episode 8 after JJ laid a groundwork and then everything got fucked. And now it's like, well, what's Episode 9 going to be? Well, what's Alien Awakenings going to be? Because now Ridley's got to come back and like fix things. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, Covenant's going to be... Get out your notes, because we're gonna give you a lot to process. But yeah, thank y'all for watching.
A lot more David coming at you.
Oh yeah, Fassbender for days, and I'm gonna give Prometheus 7 tentacles out of 8.
Okay.
Just because it's entertaining. No, I retract that statement. 6 tentacles out of 8.
Okay, I'm there with you.
Yeah.
6 out of 8. Yeah.
Yeah, that's as good as it's gonna get. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Make sure you watch Covenant, and remember that once we get through Covenant, we're getting to the pièce de résistance, and we are going to do the original Alien by Ridley Scott, which is again Chad's favorite movie and the reason why we're doing all of this fucking work. And after that, we will do the rest of the franchise. So stay tuned. Please like the video. Please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please share. Subscribe, share, comment, do all the things. And then don't forget to check out Chad Civic's music. It will be linked in the description box. And we love you guys. And we'll see you on the other side.
Bye.